Commissioner McCarley?
I'm here.
Thank you. May I ask those who are joining us by Zoom to mute their devices and only unmute it upon speaking? We heard you, Commissioner Astorian. Thank you. Welcome. Go ahead. Continue, Narek.
Commissioner McCarley?
Yes. Good evening.
Commissioner Hartunian?
Here.
Commissioner Abkarian?
I'm here.
Chair Gazarian?
Thank you. Here. Next item, please.
Minutes for the meeting of July 29, 2020.
Any motions to approve?
Yeah. Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Astorian?
Yes.
Commissioner McCarley? Commissioner McCarley?
Speak up. Did we lose Commissioner McCarley?
I responded. There.
Perfect. Commissioner Hartunian?
Here.
Commissioner Abkarian? Chair Gazarian?
Yes. Thank you. Next item, please.
Oral communications?
Thank you. I see no calls and no cards requesting communications. Therefore, next item, please.
Recruitment and examination report?
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is our monthly recruitment examination status report. We still are under a partial hiring freeze. Most of our jobs are frozen, but we do have a number that have been exempted, and that's the activity you see on this report. We still have vacancies, resignations, retirements, and general turnover, and we have to keep our essential positions filled. This report contains all of our current recruitment activity, including the job titles of those jobs that are open, departments, the filing period, and the exam dates. If any members of the commission have questions on this item, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this is a note and file. So I'll put it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you. Next item, please.
Eligible list established.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this item is, again, our monthly eligible lists that have been established. Since our last meeting, August is typically a slower month, but we do have two lists that have been established, one promotional and the other open. One of them being the promotional being a wastewater maintenance worker, the open one, budget analyst in our finance department, which had, again, over 100 applications. Again, this is a note and file item. It shows the total number of applicants received at the various stages of the recruitment process, and then ultimately in the far right column we have the number of candidates who made it onto the eligible list. So with that, if any members of the commission have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Thank you. Any questions? Hearing none. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, wastewater maintenance series.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
And Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a class specification for approval, the wastewater maintenance series, and we're doing the entire series, which is quite a large grouping of positions. But really, the impetus behind this action relates to recent dialogue we've had with the GCEA. They're the General Employees Association, having to do with facilitating movement and promotional opportunities within this particular job series, mainly from the trainee level to the worker level. When this program was established many years ago, the intent was to hire employees in at the trainee level, people who didn't necessarily have any background in this particular area. We'd essentially hire them off the street and then train them and in some form of a rapid succession get them to the wastewater maintenance worker journey level. This hasn't always worked out that way. It sometimes has taken maybe a few years to move from the trainee to the worker. And so what we're attempting to do is find a way to facilitate that movement. The changes proposed here lay out some specifics as far as what is to be accomplished during that training period. And we took out certain requirements by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, some courses, things like that, which I understood were somewhat hard to achieve, and really put together our own sort of homegrown program of on-the-job training. So while working on this specification and looking at this focus, other changes came up, and really the entire series is being updated and made more contemporary. That essentially is the crux of this proposed revision to the series. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. I do have, I believe, Dan Hargrove, who is our Assistant Director for Public Works, who oversees this section, along with John Hicks, who's our wastewater superintendent, and Mr. Chavez from my staff also worked on this. So if the commission has questions, again, we can hopefully answer those for you.
Any questions?
There's Commissioner Carey and move to approve unless there's any.
If there are no questions, there's a motion to approve. If there are no questions, I'd ask for a second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Historian? Commissioner Historian?
Yes.
Commissioner McCarley? Commissioner McCarley?
May I ask Commissioner Astorian, is your phone on mute?
No, actually, it's not.
Because it's static on this end, very loud, Commissioner. If it's possible to mute it in between.
And I have my section has no static, but yes.
See, when you're speaking, it's clear now. Thank you. It's just so much static that we can't hear when the others are trying to cast their votes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Go ahead.
Commissioner McCarley?
Yes.
Commissioner Hartunian?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Chair Gazarian?
Yes, thank you. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, billing and collection series.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a class specification revision to this specification for this billing and collection series within our finance department. This is not the accounting series where everyone has to have an accounting degree. This is a group that works on primarily the billing and collections within the department. This department has had some turnover and a key retirement, and so we're sort of looking at repurposing this series and moving as we move forward and providing some additional promotional opportunities within the organization. There are some adjustments to the minimum requirements for these positions. In one area, they're removing this certified revenue officer certification for the supervisor position. And this was put in here a while back when the business registration certificate office was supposed to be moved to finance, but rather it's been kept within the community development department. Aside from that, there are just some general changes to this to update the series and again make it more contemporary with current practices. If you have questions on this, I'd be happy to try and answer them. And we have several individuals from our finance department, including the department director, Michelle Flynn, on standby if you have questions. And Mr. Petrosian from my staff worked on this with them as well. So with that, if there are questions, we'd be happy.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Any questions, fellow commissioners?
Commissioner Abkarian, move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Historian?
Yes.
Commissioner McCarley?
Yes.
Commissioner Hartunian?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Chair Gazarian?
Yes, thank you. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, Secretarial series.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is the secretarial series that we're reviewing, this specification series. We've been looking at our clerical and secretarial positions of late. I think the last few months we've looked at that, and also had sort of a specific focus on this concept of typing speed. And that has gone into what we're looking at here. The secretarial series has always had these minimum speed typing requirements, and we want to explore whether these requirements continue to be necessary in this day and age. First of all, we don't have as many positions that fall into this series as we had in the past. When I recall starting here over 30 years ago, pretty much every executive, every manager had their own secretary, and those individuals did nothing but sit there and type all day. In more recent years, we've come to a point where most managers, middle managers, professionals do their own preparation of documents, whether it's a simple memo or a spreadsheet, something along those lines. And really, again, the emphasis on speed typing is not as important as it used to be. Additionally, much of the work being done, at least by the secretarial pool in this day and age, is again short memos, agendas, spreadsheets, tables, that sort of thing. So we actually went out and reached out to the departments that still continue to use secretarial positions to see what their specific needs were, and we've come up with some recommendations in the form of this series where. Essentially, a couple departments, and they are represented in our group, community development. Their secretaries really don't have the need for the 50 word per minute speed typing. Integrated Waste has an office services supervisor. It used to be sort of a secretarial position, but the emphasis is mainly on supervision now, not how well the person types. So. In the revisions, we've looked at those specific functional areas and determined that that in these areas, depending on the department's actual needs, that we're not needing those typing speed requirements anymore. So with that, I'll bring this to the commission for your consideration. We do have representatives from both Community Development Department and our Integrated Waste Management Department in case there are questions on those specific areas. And once again, this is a process that Mr. Petrosian worked on. So if there are questions, we'll do our best to try and answer them for you. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah. So, if I could, Chair?
Of course, please.
Thank you. As I registered my comments last month, maybe a month or so ago, when the same issue was brought forward by our city attorney about the elimination of the typing requirement. I certainly do not want to be identified as a Luddite, reaching back and mandating skills that seemingly appear out of date, but I will indicate that I will vote no on this, perhaps as a representation of my view that since we have not yet perfected across the board tools such as speech recognition and dictation systems that would supplant the real requirement for typing by us or those who are managers or integrated into a variety of different functions. Until we get to that stage, I do believe that there's greater efficiency using and employing that person who has acquired the skill, that typing skill, and allow that person to gain those efficiencies that the rest of us who have basically hunt and peck skills with the keyboards will never achieve. And that's my position on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments or expressions?
Mr. Chair, Albert Librarian here.
Please.
I just have one comment, if I may.
Of course.
On the executive secretary position, I don't, I'll go with whatever majority decides to do. I usually don't like to carve an exception for one department specifically because it just causes a lot of issues. And it has some indication that we're doing a favor for just one department. So on that one, I don't feel comfortable, but I'll go with whatever the majority decides. But it's really on the office services supervisor, if the requirement is really not necessary, we just take that out altogether.
I agree with what you've said, but I will refrain from commenting for the moment. Any other comments? No other comments. Well, is there a motion to approve, disapprove? How would you like, I would ask that there be a motion to approve. I know that Commissioner McCarley is going to vote no already, and I know that it's a partial yes and a partial majority vote from Commissioner Abkarian. So I'd solicit a vote, I'd solicit a motion to approve. If none is going to be made, I'll make one.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
May I ask Mr. Doyle a question?
of course, Mr. Doyle is listening.
Mr. Doyle, just a quick question from you. In reference to the requirement for office service supervisor, is the requirement to type 50 words per minute in any of the departments something that we really need to put into this bits at all?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abkarian, probably not. And I'll go back to the way things were many, many years ago. Typically, that supervisor was somebody who grew out of the secretarial pool and was elevated to a supervisory position. And just by tradition, we maintained the typing speed requirement. But your points are always very well taken on this, and I think the point you made is it necessary for any of the departments? And at this point, no. I would say the key factor for that position at that level would be supervisorial skill and the ability to do all of the things that we would require of people who are in charge of supervising others, including completing performance evaluation, directing work, assigning work, holding people accountable. Those are the key areas, at least with regard to that particular job. Typing speed is pretty much irrelevant.
If I may, thank you, Mr. Doyle. So I refrained from commenting until the opportunity was given to the rest of us. My focus was a few things. One was that we see that in the paperwork handed to us, the Glendale City Employees Association and the Glendale Management Association have not expressed any concerns at the time of this agenda's posting with respect to these recommendations. I look at currently what is being asked of us. What I understand, Mr. Doyle, and if I'm incorrect, please correct me, that what is being asked is to eliminate the typing 50 words a minute requirement from two job specifications, if you will, or from two job titles.
Within specific department.
Within specific department, executive secretary and office services supervisor. Office services supervisor does not seem to me to have a primary function to be typing, and an executive secretary is not a secretary, but rather an executive one that would include some typing, I suppose, but I'm not sure about the amount of typing. But then I look at the rest of the pages of this particular agenda item, which takes me to page 35 overall of the packet, and page 5 of 7 of the agenda item. And I note that secretary to the city clerk has a minimum requirement of accurately typing 50 net words per minute. I note that the secretary to the city clerk steno has a additional essential function of taking shorthands at 100 words a minute. And an office services supervisor takes shorthanded 100 words a minute. Secretary to the city manager type accurately at 50 net words per minute. And the secretary to the city manager, again, 100 words per minute taking shorthand. So it seems that all the rest, as I just recited, those are remaining. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So I am not going to second guess. I run my office outside this role that I play this evening, and everybody runs their office a certain way. I don't see, if there is no concern from the associations that I listed, and HR is coming to me with this request, coming to us, I'm prepared to vote on it. With these observations in mind, I'm inclined to vote in the affirmative. Is there a motion so that we can vote one way or the other?
I will make one. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I would make a motion and see if this works. I would make a motion to all the recommendations minus taking out the 50 words per minute requirement under the office service supervisor title.
I'm sorry. Let me go back to, I
Chair,
lost.
Based on page 35 and 36. So all the recommendation accepted, and we will also take the 50 words per minute requirements from that entire category, from the entire office service supervisor category.
I think we are taking that out, right?
He's saying that to remove it completely for all departments, not just for integrated waste at that level.
For all office service supervisors, I agree. That's excellent. Thank you, Commissioner.
Staff.
You could make that motion.
That is my motion. That is my motion to approve the series and take out the typing accuracy of 50 words per minute requirement from the office service supervisor series.
Okay.
Order.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Astorian,
Yes.
Commissioner McCarley,
Oh,
nope. Commissioner Hartunian,
yes.
Commissioner Abkarian,
Yes.
Chair Gazarian.
Yes. Thank you. Next item, please.
Job bulletin for approval, librarian specialist, technology services.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a job bulletin for approval as opposed to specification that the three previous items were. As you know, not all job bulletins are required to come before the commission, but there are certain circumstances which require that. And the primary one with regard to this particular bulletin has to do with the fact that we are asking that this be recruited for on an open basis, whereas in its previous administration it was done on a promotional basis. This is brought before the commission so that the bargaining group that represents this particular classification could render an objection if they believe that there are a sufficient number of in-house candidates that would warrant keeping this as a promotional in-house process. Really, the impetus behind this has to do with the area of specialization in this for this particular job is a librarian specialist, and there's a slash next to it for technology. And this is our our librarian specialist jobs usually have some area of special emphasis, and these are librarians. These are people who've gone to school and gotten the degree and all that. Sometimes it could be, reference area, it could be, business background or some other specialty. In this case, we're looking for somebody with a strong background in technology. And, the bulletin was written in such a fashion that it was customized to some degree to emphasize those particular areas, looking at, in particular, library computer application systems and, understanding of networking and hardware and installations and support on the various applications that are utilized in a library setting. That's really the purpose of this particular bulletin, and that's why it's before you. So we have put this out there. Again, Mr. Petrosian worked on this bulletin. We've had no objections from the GCA on this. This is one of their positions. And therefore, we're recommending that it be approved as submitted as a open bulletin for librarian specialist technology services. If you have questions on this, we'd be happy to try and answer those. We do have our library director, Mr. Gary Schaefer, on call, along with some of his staff, in case there are some more specific areas you'd like to question.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Any questions, fellow commissioners?
I do. This is Commissioner McCarley. Just informational for me, I am looking at the minimum requirements under knowledge, skills, and abilities. And one of the minimum requirements is an understanding, yet not clearly defined, of computer operating systems, including Unix, Linux, Windows, and relational databases, Oracle and SQL Server. My understanding is that these are often complex, require some significant study, and question to whomever who could answer is what level of competence is library executive staff looking at when it's seeking an individual basically entry-level position, what level of competence in those particular computer systems.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, I will refer that question to either Mr. Schaefer or one of his principal administrators, Mr. Hahn. So, Gary, if you'd like to comment, please.
Certainly. Good afternoon. Good evening, commissioners. Wonderful to be with you. So the system that kind of underpins library operations that allows us to lend hundreds of thousands of books to, tens of thousands of customers, does use uses this kind of operating system. So it is cloud-based, but it does require a certain amount of understanding of how it works to occasionally bend it to our will. Definitely need this kind of experience. And it isn't really an entry-level position. This would be a position with someone would have experience working with these kind of systems, most likely in a library. Technology really, in this day and age, yes, we certainly still have books and use a lot of books, but this technology allows us to lend those. But more and more, the technology we're using allows customers to download their daily Los Angeles Times, stream music, watch videos, educational videos, as well as entertainment videos, and so on. And all of that is technologically based. And so more and more, the work we're doing in the library is technologically based and requires, folks to have a certain amount of understanding of that. And in this particular position, a fair to great amount of understanding on how these systems work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, any follow-ups? Commissioner McCarley, are you satisfied?
I'm certainly appreciative of the response. Again, I suppose I could ask a quite direct question. Is the library staff asking somebody who has, for instance, coding experience with each one of those systems to allow on-site modification to accomplish specific tasks at the Glendale Library?
Not sure I quite understand the question. Michael, could you address the question, please? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Good evening. Yes, in terms of coding specifically for those.
Sorry, can you identify yourself, please?
Oh, apologies. This is Michael Hahn, Principal Administrator at the library. Yes, so programming-wise, there is some requirement, and that we do have some coding within various operating systems. I think the biggest piece of this is more of the ability to manipulate and code the database that is running on those operating systems. These are off-the-shelf products, so it's not necessarily building anything from scratch, but the ability to manipulate and change and configure these operating systems and databases is certainly needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have a follow-up question, if I may.
Sure.
And is this is Commissioner Artunian, is it the need for this technological background, is that the skill that's forcing us to open this position to outside candidates as opposed to keeping it within the city window?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. It is. The position is, we have many librarians working for us, but simply no one with these skills. The gentleman who was occupying the position actually promoted, so he is now he'll still be with the library system, but he's promoted to the manager, the branch supervisor position at the Montrose Library, so that's what's necessitating us to fill this position.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, may I have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Historian? Commissioner Historian?
Yes.
Commissioner McCarley? Commissioner McCarley?
Yes, sure. Yes.
Commissioner Hartunian?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Chair Gazarian?
Yes, thank you. Next item, please.
Adoption of resolution, report on unclassified status proposal for caseworker 1 positions.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is an adoption of a resolution for unclassified status proposal for 2 caseworker 1 positions within the Community Services and Parks Department, the Workforce Development section. This is not something that we do very often, that is to declare positions unclassified, but this is something that it's within the Commission's authority to grant. As I've said, we don't do this often, but the declaration of any of our salaried positions as unclassified essentially means that they would not be part of the civil service system. Again, we don't do this very often, but in this instance, we have 2 grant-funded positions within our workforce development section within Community Services and Parks. These positions are funded by various grants, and they will be a caseworker 1 level jobs, and they'll be doing work in the assisting and job placement services for people that are affected by the COVID-19 closures. Because these are likely to be temporarily funded positions, we are asking that they be declared unclassified, which would not provide them with civil service protections. Therefore, when the funding dries up for these positions, we would then have the option to separate those employees without the requisite appeal rights that come with civil service positions. And some of the commissioners who've been on the commission a while know that we have somewhat of a history of doing this at times when we do have temporarily grant-funded positions or federally funded positions or state-funded positions, whatever the case may be. I'll say it again, we don't ask for this very often, but when we do, there's typically a reason for it, and it's not something that we necessarily want to do often, or in some considerations be accused of abusing this process. I do want to emphasize, these are grant-funded positions, and I'll probably want Mr. Bulanikian, who's the department director, to describe the functions of these particular jobs. But essentially, they will be salaried positions. They'll be the same as any other caseworker one position, same pay, same benefits, just not the same appeal rights if we end up with the loss of the funding for these positions. And therefore, we're seeking the unclassified status. If there's any questions about this, again, I'd be happy to try and answer those. And as I said earlier, Onig Bolanikian is with us. He's the Director of Community Services and Parks, and he can provide more further background on the particular grant and the functions of these positions, if the Commission so desires. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions?
Commissioner McCarley, if I could, Chair.
Sure.
Question relates to the hiring process, specifically the candidates who we look to hire on this emergency basis. So will those applicants have to declare that they have, for instance, been unemployed for 6 months, or that they have suffered a significant financial need as a result of either COVID infection or consequences of the pandemic on their family? Or is this solicitation of candidates wide open without those specific filters?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McCarley, I believe it is the latter, and Mr. Bolanikian can correct me, but we're seeking individuals to assist with people who were put out of work as a result of the COVID-19. It doesn't, at least far from my understanding, the individuals who apply for this have to show any proof of being affected by that. Am I correct, Onig?
Yes, good evening, Chair Hazarian, members of the Commission. This position would be open for anyone that has case management experience, employment experience, employees that currently work at the Verdugo Job Center as hourly employees. The grants that we've received are COVID-related grants, so the funds coming in will assist the caseworker in assisting unemployed residents in Glendale and throughout the Verdugo Workforce Development Region, assisting them in finding jobs, job training, job development, and assistance in on-the-job training, and even we've received some funds for schooling too. So the caseworker one, the two caseworker one positions will basically be case managers assisting the unemployed in finding jobs.
Thank you.
Chair, if I could,
Yes.
just one follow-up.
Sure.
I am looking, I've not done the research, and for that, I would apologize, but I am looking at the grant sources, meaning the NDWG funds, and whether those funds, which are the consequence of congressional appropriation, have the filters that I had described. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Frankly, it is a suggestion, nothing more than a suggestion, that legal review those grants specifically for any limiting language as to the pool of candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I hear someone want to make a comment?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I have a quick question to Albert Kirian.
Yes.
Maybe from Joel. So Joel, I understand the unclassified specification. The only question that I have is this: are these people, let's say they do this job and this grant is given to us for 2 years, let's say, for example. If the grant is cut off after 2 years and there's a promotional job opportunity within the city, are these individuals qualified to then apply for a promotional position within the city?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abkarian, they absolutely would be. You don't have to be in the classified service to be eligible for promotion. into the classified service. But that's a great question, and certainly if the individuals have reached a level to where they have the experience, and we typically allow anyone, whether they're salaried or hourly, who have the 6 months equivalent time in with the city in any capacity, other than perhaps a temp agency, that sort of thing. But if you have that experience, you certainly can be eligible to promote within our system.
Okay. With that, unless if there's any other questions, I'll move to approve.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'd like to solicit a second to Commissioner Abkarian's motion.
Yeah, second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Astorian? Commissioner Astorian?
Yes.
Commissioner McCarley?
Yes.
Commissioner Hartunian?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian? Yes.
Did you call? Did you say?
Commissioner
Did
Abkarian?
Commissioner Abkarian respond? It's his motion, so yes. All right. So and I vote yes. Thank you. Next item, please.
Examination appeal, Michelle Sampson, account on 1.
Mr. Doyle.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is an examination appeal from a recent exam that we conducted for Accountant 1. This is a somewhat of an unusual case, but it does go to the I'd say flexibility in our rules that enable the various examination processes to be appealed for various causes as the candidates see fit. In this case, we conducted a written examination for this position, Accountant 1, in our finance department. We had a large candidate pool, so we administered a written exam at the Glendale Civic Auditorium, which I'm sure all the commissioners are familiar with, in several groups. I think we had about 3 groups, and we had to keep these groups, as you know, smaller just for social distancing purposes during the COVID-19. And we administered the exam from one group after another. In the last session that we were testing, we had a situation occur where a candidate, and this is not the appellant, but we had a candidate who arrived to the examination on time, but the individual parked in a parking lot at the corner of Verdugo and Mountain, which again, the commissioners are all probably familiar with that particular lot, which is quite large. Most of the candidates who participated in this process parked in the parking structure there at the auditorium, which is that multi-level parking garage just north of the Civic Auditorium building. This one candidate parked in the large lot and parked her car, left the car, started walking into the auditorium, and was approached by a member of the Civic Auditorium staff, and who asked her to move her car because what I guess we didn't realize, and neither did the candidate, and there was a day camp going on in the lower level portion of or in one of the areas of the Civic Auditorium, and at some point during the administration of that exam, parents were going to be coming in and picking up their kids from that day camp, and for safety purposes, they asked this candidate to move her car. So this candidate did. She walked back to her car, she moved it into the parking structure and locked it, came into the Civic Auditorium, and at that point she was about a minute late, and as she walked in, they had begun the instructions. She really didn't miss much of the instructions. In fact, she kind of waited there in the hallway, and one of my staff members approached her and asked her, what happened. She ended up telling her, well, I'm sorry, I parked in the wrong section apparently, and I apologize. And at that point, in the judgment of my staff, she hadn't missed any of the instructions, and there was plenty of time to have her seated and resume with the instructions in order to administer that written exam to her. And I will note that on that particular day, there were no attendants actually in the, there's a guard booth there. There was no one there directing people on where to park. So, in our view, this individual parking in that section, it was truly not her fault. She really didn't know. But nevertheless, another candidate did see the individual be seated a few minutes late into the instructions, and that candidate approached my staff at the conclusion of the exam and asked that that individual who had arrived late be removed from the selection process for Accountant 1. At that point, we took the information from the individual. Her name was Michelle Sampson. My staff informed her on how to file an official protest or appeal. She did so by sending an email to both my staff and then ultimately to me. And at that point, I considered the appeal. I considered the appeal. I spoke to my staff. I looked into the matter, and in my view, the individual who the appellant believed arrived late, I don't believe they actually did arrive late. And I think, given the fact that there were no specific signs or directions, it was not her fault that she had parked in what proved to be the wrong lot, and therefore that it was something that, in the judgment of my staff and looking at this, it seemed like a reasonable conclusion to allow that particular candidate to remain in the selection process. Ms. Sampson, the appellant, in subsequent emails back and forth, indicated that she disagreed with my determination and asked me to be put in touch with the city's legal department. I did tell her that the appropriate venue for registering this type of appeal is, in fact, the Civil Service Commission, and I informed her of this meeting, and she had requested to be put on the agenda and that she be heard as far as this issue. So again, we do have Ms. Sampson on the WebEx, and I presume, Mr. Chair, you'd want to hear certainly her perspective on this. Again, the desire by this candidate is to have that other candidate removed from this process and any subsequent processes involving this Accountant 1 exam. And at this point, I think it would be appropriate for the commission to hear from Ms. Sampson, and if there are questions, we can all answer them. The staff member who dealt with this was Ms. Babayan from my staff, and she's available as well if there are questions.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. I'm looking at my screen. I don't see a Ms. Sampson. I do see a Ms. Michelle Flynn. Is that?
Michelle Flynn is the finance director.
Can you come and assist me? I don't see. I don't see any.
I actually see Ms. Sampson both on phone and on the actual. I actually see her in two different places. So I think she's available. Maybe she can answer.
I am, if you're ready.
One moment, Ms. Sampson, thank you, because on my screen, I only see a few folks. I did see, for example, earlier presenters as well, not everyone. So I don't know if it's a computer matter here. I don't see it.
She's not on camera.
She's not, oh, she's not.
She's not on camera.
Oh, she's not on camera. Okay, but she's here.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, very well. Ms. Sampson, I do want to hear from you. My fellow commissioners want to hear from you. So that I understand it, you are appealing, well, you really are not appealing. You're asking this commission to decide that another person who applied for a position should not be considered. Am I correct? And I'll let you go on.
Correct. Again,
Okay.
my name is Michelle Sampson,
Thank you.
and I'm placing this appeal because I believe that once the doors have been closed and the proctor has begun speaking, for any testing, be it the one that I attended or any other test, that given some sort of earthquake where the entire room needs to be cleared, or if the person has a medical note, that they should not be allowed to participate in the exam. I disagree with what the prior person said. There was clear instructions in the email that was sent out to everybody that they were supposed to park in the parking structure. There were also signs posted that I noted as I personally drove in. And as the prior person said, hundreds of people took this exam, and yet one person managed not to follow both the email instructions or the signage that was posted. But again, once the doors have shut and the proctor has begun speaking, I feel that that means that the testing has started. Even if they're a minute late or 10 minutes late, in my opinion, unless they have a medical excuse or there's a life-threatening emergency that requires evacuation, that person should not be allowed in.
Thank you. I have questions of you and of our HR director. However, I'm going to defer to my fellow commissioners. Any questions, fellow commissioners, of Ms. Sampson? Or Mr. Doyle, for that matter.
Hi, this is Albert Afkir, and I have a question from Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle, the actual testing hadn't begun at the time when this other candidate actually was allowed to walk in, correct? Testing process hadn't begun.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abkarian, that is correct. They were just beginning the instructions, and the instructions for this type of a process are going to run anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes for these types of exams, because it involves a Scantron, and there are a lot of very detailed instructions involved in that. So.
I think that that's setting a precedent where people can now come in 15 to 30 minutes late to any exam, as long as the Scantron portion hasn't begun yet, and just say, oh, I didn't see the signage, or I didn't read the email. Is that who you really want to hire?
Thank you, Ms. Sampson. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner McCarley, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I have one question for you, and that is, what have been the consequences to you as a result of this anomaly in the testing process, or as you've kind of characterized it, a violation of the rules? Has something bad occurred? For instance, you were eliminated from consideration, and this other candidate found herself one of the successful testees?
That's not something that I would be privy to. That would be confidential information only disclosed within the department. What I'm arguing here is the principle of the matter. Hundreds of people were able to follow the instructions.
I understand.
And if people are allowed in after the scan, if people are allowed in 15, 30 minutes late, as long as the Scantroning hasn't begun yet, then what's the point of even setting a start date?
Well, I fully appreciate your commentary. The question, of course, when there is an appeal, is somebody has suffered, and presumably when I reviewed your appeal, I assumed that something adverse occurred, meaning perhaps you were not selected. The reason you weren't selected was that the process was disrupted when this woman entered the testing facility 1 minute late, and as a result you lost focus as you were trying to answer the questions. That is not the case. I've misinterpreted your appeal. I think that's what you're telling me right now.
That is the case, yes, that is exactly what happened. It was a disturbance. And like I said, the passing point is something that's kept confidential within the department. So I wouldn't be able to prove without taking legal action to get release of records whether or not I was disqualified due to this other person still being allowed into the testing.
Well, more specifically, did you pass?
She doesn't know that, Commissioner McCarley.
Oh, the results have not been posted, right? That, if I hear it, okay, it's only been, all right, I appreciate that. Nobody knows whether or not they're,
I'm sorry, I see a hand go up. Forgive me, Commissioner McCarley. Is that not correct?
Just to
Mr.
clarify,
Doyle?
the results have been posted, but it's certainly within her rights to not discuss her
I see,
specific
the results
outcome.
have been posted. It is, of course, within her
correct.
rights not to discuss, but the question from Commissioner McCarley was a very specific question. And Ms. Sampson, I'd like you to please pay attention to my understanding of Commissioner McCarley's question, and that is, he was asking if you believe you have suffered a harm as a result of the 1 minute late entry. Now, I hear you saying, well, we shouldn't let people in 15 minutes late or 30 minutes late, but the facts are not that. Forgive me, one moment, ma'am. One moment.
Her late entrance was a disruption and did not allow me to hear what the proctor was saying.
I see. All righty, thank you. Any other questions before I give my commentary and my concerns about the whole issue? Go ahead, I see Commissioner Harutunian raising his hand. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Doyle, do I remember correctly that there were other people who were significantly late, and would have been a distraction to test takers who were not allowed to proceed? Am I correct?
I'm sorry, sir,
I think he said, am I remembering correctly, that there were other people who were late and that there was something about disruption, that they weren't allowed to participate, etc. Am I paraphrasing it correctly?
Who were late more significantly, like 5, 10, and 15 minutes, like
Yeah.
Ms. Sampson is mentioning?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hartunian. Again, this individual came in approximately 1 minute late. She stood in the hallway as the instructions were just beginning. My staff member saw her, asked her what happened. Then she was satisfied with her explanation as far as the parking lot, escorted her in very quietly
Before the testing began?
Oh, absolutely. It was during the instructions, and
But not relevant instructions according to the memorandum I've received. Forgive the interruption. It says, for safety purposes, the candidate was asked by the auditorium staff to move her vehicle in the parking structure. That caused her to be a minute late. She entered the civic auditorium approximately a minute after all candidates had taken their seats and waited at the entrance of the main hall. Teresa Clark, the finance department representative assisting human resources with the examination process, witnessed the candidate waiting. Soon thereafter, Ida Babayan approached the candidate and after checking her in, escorted her to an open seat in the main hall. The candidate was allowed to participate in the exam process because she did not miss any relevant portion of the written examination or its instructions. Is that accurate, Mr. Doyle?
that's
All
correct. And Mr. Chair, if I could add,
How do you define relevant?
may I finish your?
Yeah, well, Mr. Doyle will be heard from now, Ms. Sampson. I'll come back to you, I
How do
promise.
you know what was missed?
Ms. Sampson, I will come back to you, I promise. Mr. Doyle, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I've been informed by my staff that there was someone who arrived approximately 20 minutes after candidates were let in, and that individual was told that it's too late, you missed too much of the instructions, therefore that person was sent away. So again, the person, I'd say we were consistent in our consideration of the facts and what what's stated here. Someone who was in fact late, missed significant relevant portions of those instructions, was sent away.
I've looked at the rest of the memo, Mr. Doyle, and the person you're referring to, who arrived approximately 15 to 20 minutes late, during the delivery of the instructions, was not allowed to participate. But I'm seeing a distinction where the one that Ms. Sampson has an issue with is one who arrived before any relevant instructions vis-a-vis the examination. I've taken plenty of exams and I still remember them decades later. I know, I can kind of visualize some pleasantry types of initial introductory remarks that doesn't really go to the core of a testing requirements, rules, and regulations vis-a-vis instructions as to the test. Now, so that's how I'm seeing it. I don't know, what occurred beyond that. Obviously, Ms. Sampson was there, and for the reasons that she stated, she believes that that person should not have been allowed to participate. If there are other comments or questions, I'd entertain them. Otherwise, I have some discussion points that I'd like to make before there is a motion or a decision that we could perhaps come to. Seeing, I'm sorry.
Clearly noted.
I'm sorry?
Parking signs were clearly noted and stated in the email.
I will come back to you again, Ms. Sampson. I'm right now asking my fellow commissioners, and I see no questions. I would like to ask.
Sir Artunian has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. So go ahead, please.
Just a quick comment. I just wanted to clarify that my earlier question was just answered regarding other candidates being significantly late and not being allowed, which also addresses Ms. Sampson's concern of this 1 minute delay being a precedent setting, whereas we did have an incident in the same day where a person who was more significantly late and would be a potential or a clear distraction to the test takers was not allowed in to the examination room because to the 1 minute delay with the person who just came in right before the instructions began. So that's
You asked,
comment.
no, it was not right before. And you asked if it disturbed me, and I said yes.
Mr. Chair, can I ask you a quick question from Ms. Sampson?
Yes, of course.
Ms. Sampson, this is Commissioner Albert Abkarian. You said that it disturbed you and you had some issues in reference to understanding. At any time prior to starting your actual test taking, did you ask to have any portion of the instruction repeated or request that basically that you didn't understand due to the interruption, and if they can go ahead and go over it again?
Correct.
My question is, did you ever, during the actual instructions, ask them to repeat or rephrase or go over some of the instructions that you claim you didn't hear due to the distraction?
Yes.
You did ask them to repeat it again?
Yes.
And they did repeat those instructions for you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Abkarian. So I'm looking at this, Mr. Doyle, and I'm going to direct my inquiry to you at the moment. Ms. Sampson has submitted an appeal to your department to remove another candidate from the examination process. Having established that, Ms. Sampson made a reference to every candidate got instructions where to park. Would she be referring to this attachment B that is addressed to, actually of all persons, to Ms. Sampson? It says, "Dear Michelle Sampson, thank you for your patience, etc. Absent further changes, you have been scheduled." Gives the exam date, the check-in time, the location, Civic Auditorium upper level, and then it says where the location is. The auditorium is located at the intersection of Verdugo Road and Mountain Street, across the street from Glendale Community College. Is that something that the city sent out?
Yes, that's the notice to the
Would
candidates.
that be the same thing that was sent out to the dozens or hundreds of other applicants?
Yes.
It
yeah.
would.
And
So, is that correct?
That's correct, and there's nothing on there that I can see that directs people to park in the structure.
You've answered my question. You've answered my question. My follow-up
I'm looking-
question to that is, I'm a resident of
Signage and the
the,
location.
Ms. Sampson, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make final remarks. I ask you to please give me the courtesy of questioning our chief examiner and director of HR so that everybody gets a complete understanding. Upon arriving to the Civic Auditorium location, if anyone, whether it's the person that Ms. Sampson seeks to disqualify or whether it's someone else, at the corner of Verdugo and Mountain Avenue, there is a parking lot. Is that parking lot part of the auditorium parking structures on both sides of the auditorium?
Of course it is.
It is. I know. Us lawyers, we ask questions we know the answers to, but we need the witness to tell us, Mr. Doyle. Okay? So we never ask a question we don't know the answer to. So having understood that, you have conceded on behalf of the department that neither staff nor, as you have discovered through your investigative process, your staff, most importantly, that more than anybody else, I'm not concerned at this moment about the candidate that Ms. Sampson wants to disqualify. Your staff, city staff, was not aware that the large open lot was being used for a day camp program, correct?
That's correct.
So you knowing that, then when you then have recited the rest of the memorandum that sets forth your department's perspective, you have a person entering the auditorium a minute late. You have uncovered that because she had to move the car, she's now a minute late. She does not miss any of the critical instructions as you've deemed it. She then is allowed to sit down, and before the testing begins, some other person during instructions is not allowed because they come in mid instructions, and then at some point the testing begins. If most importantly, you say the inclusion of the impacted candidate in no way affects Ms. Simpson's status, and the auditorium is a facility that you had contracted, whether it belongs to the city or is a separate entity. That was the facility you directed everyone to go to, and you didn't specify only one parking lot. Any parking lot would have sufficed. I am now, if the facts are as I see them, I would like to hear from Ms. Sampson. Ms. Sampson, these are the facts as one of 5 commissioners, is seeing them. So tell us why you think this is so prejudicial to you, because when someone appeals, obviously you are appealing as an aggrieved party. If on the other hand you're recommending to the city to do something a certain way, well, that's fine, you can recommend it to the city, but here we are, 5 commissioners hearing an appeal from you. That's why it started out with Commissioner McCarley asking if you were in some way prejudiced, and what we gleaned from your presentation is that you believe you say you were disturbed because of the entry of this individual into the hall, yet in response to Commissioner Abkarian, you say that you did ask for some instruction to be repeated, and it was repeated, and then at some point the testing began. So tell us, is this more of a advisory policy type of a presentation that you're making to the city, or you are really asking us to disqualify someone who has no opportunity to be heard here, is not before us, without hearing that person's equities, if there are any? What are you exactly asking us to do? Thank you. Proceed.
First of all, I'm stating that just because I personally was disturbed does not mean that I'm prejudiced. So please be careful of your language.
No, the word prejudice is a legal word. Forgive me, Ms. Sampson, prejudice does not mean prejudice against the person. It means suffer the legal harm. That's the context of the word prejudice I am using. So please do not misunderstand the word. In legal terms, when you seek redress in an appellate setting, you must show prejudice, that you have been prejudiced somehow. Prejudiced, ED. That's what I'm asking for. Not if you have a prejudice against somebody. I don't know you, so why would I even make such a ludicrous assumption? Forgive me, that's not what I'm saying at all. Please, proceed.
Sir, I can understand you even when you're not shouting. Secondly, I would like to point out that there was signage posted clearly in several locations as to where test takers should park. If not HR, then who posted that signage? Third, I am asking both for the appeal and for the policy change, that once the doors are closed, no further admittance be made unless there's a medical emergency or something that requires evacuation. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. For the record, I neither intended nor did I realize that my voice was loud, that I was shouting at you. So if that is how it came across, please accept my apology. It's just that I wanted to make sure that you are not mischaracterizing my use of the word prejudice. So with that, my apology as far as my voice being too loud for you. Mr. Doyle, you were shaking your head. Mr. Doyle, you were shaking your head in disagreement that signs were clearly posted as to where to park. Is that not your understanding, Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, that is not my understanding. There are, I think we're all familiar with the Civic Auditorium, and you enter off of Verdugo Road, and to the right there is a parking structure, multi-levels. To the left there's parking in that immediate area, and then you go around the building and you see that huge lot at the corner of Verdugo and Mountain. But my understanding is that there were no signs specifically directing the test takers on which of those lots to park. And I at this point, I'd like to have Ms. Babayan, if she is on the phone, who is...
Mr. Doyle, do you mind if I interject here for 1 second?
Sure.
I apologize, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I don't, the focus of my inquiry alone is not signs in the streets. The focus of my inquiry is when this person got in, based on the determination of the people at the site, an explanation by her, and the timing of what happened, no one was put in any worse position than they would have been if this person arrived a minute earlier. So accordingly, based on that determination, and the fact that I don't believe that anyone was put in any worse position. In fact, as Ms. Sampson said, she asked the examiners to repeat some instructions, and they were. Accordingly, no one was put in any worse position than they were. I would like to go ahead and move forward with this. I think we've given everyone enough time. I think everyone has said what they needed to say. I personally believe it's very clear, and I'd like to go ahead and do a motion to deny the appeal.
Ms. Sampson, I want to give you the last word. I think you may have been trying to speak while I may have been engaging with Mr. Doyle in questioning. Did you have anything else to add?
No, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sampson. Any other comments or questions from anyone, understanding that there is a motion by Commissioner Abkarian to deny the appeal? No comments. Is there a second to that motion? Is that you, Mr. Commissioner McCarley?
Yes.
All right, then let's have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Storian?
No.
Commissioner McCarley?
Deny the appeal.
Commissioner Hartunian,
Deny the appeal.
Commissioner Abkarian,
Denied.
Chair Gazarian.
Deny the appeal. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sampson. Thank you, Commissioners. Next item, please.
Report.
Chair Gazarian, this is Lucy Varpetian. Could we get clarification from Commissioner Astorian as to the no? Does he agree that it should be denied, or is he voting no, that it should not be denied?
Thank
I
you.
voted no, it should not be denied.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Reports.
Reports, Mrs. Doyle.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the only report we have is our late performance evaluation report. As you can see, we have a mostly clear list of departments with no past due evaluations. We have 2 that have some past dues. I'm embarrassed to admit one of those is mine, so my apologies. I am here before you because I'm always here, but nevertheless, I do want to commend this organization for getting these evaluations in on time. If you'll recall, we kind of laid off on the deadlines for these evaluations for a few months due to the COVID pandemic from roughly mid-March to early July, but we did start it up again, and we communicated with our departments to take care of any of the backlog, and they really did perform. There was a lot of catch-up work during the months of July and August, and to get to where we're at today is quite an accomplishment. So again, I want to commend the department and once again thank the commission for their vigilance on this subject. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank Mr. Doyle and the staff. We've been, I've been on this for many, many years now, as Mr. Doyle knows, and I've always asked for the performance evaluation. We've always said to the fact that some hearings come in and we need to have them. And I just wanted to say that departments like community development with 107, community service and parks 91, fire with 201, Thunder Water and Power with 270, police department with 333, and public works with 239 have no late performances, which is just incredible. And I want to thank all the departments and Mr. Doyle and his staff for just getting this thing to us sometime.
Thank you, Commissioner Abkarian. If we're done with this item, next item, please.
Civil Service Commission staff comments.
Any comments other than the one made by Commissioner Abkarian? I have a very brief comment to make. I believe for the first time in my life, I called 911 last week. And let me just say that the 911 operator who I came to inquire, and I had a suspicion, but it was confirmed, was operating out of our own police department, was unbelievably professional, effective, and useful and helpful. Why I called 911? Because a concerned neighbor called me and said that not even a minute after some of my family members had driven off from the driveway, a van had pulled up with 3 individuals who came out with a ladder and went from the side of the house into the back of my house. Well, fortunately, I was not in my office 20 miles away from the city of Glendale, but I was in another office in Glendale some 5 miles away from my home. And by the time I immediately left that location and got to my residence, police had responded. Helicopter was overhead, and a person was apprehended in the backyard. The person that was apprehended in the backyard, the happy ending to that trauma, because I had a teenager at home at the time, a 19-year-old, which caused me to fear for the person's safety, obviously. The person that was in the backyard was a maintenance person who had neglected to advise us that he would be there and had decided to come and do maintenance work. The professionalism of the police officers was not something that is coming from a concerned citizen that the police responded to his residence. The professionalism and the compliments I want to give on the record to the department personnel that responded comes from the person who was in handcuffs. Because the person in handcuffs, who I was apologizing to profusely, who the police immediately released upon me saying, "Oh my goodness, this is someone that I know very well, who has been doing a lot of work in electrical work in the home." They of course released him immediately, and then when I was apologizing to him, he was telling me how professional the police officers were, how nice they were, how polite they were. And in today's climate where there is so much tension about concerns, some legitimate, some perhaps exaggerated, it was very refreshing for me, especially given the fact that my line of work is that of a criminal defense attorney, to see that once again our department distinguished itself. So I want to say I cannot thank those fine men and women of the police department. I reached out to the chief and expressed the sentiments that I am now putting on the record. And thank you for hearing me out for a couple of minutes. If there are no other comments, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Have a good rest of the week. Be safe, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.